been talking about this rabbit hole that exists with the corruption that exists in the current provincial government. That sounds like a pretty bold statement to make, doesn't it? There's corruption. Boy, I sure hope you'd be able to back that up if you're going to say something like that. We're at a point now where we feel pretty comfortable that we can back it up. And I want to be really, really clear before we go through all of the things that we're about to go through. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to be breaking this story down over the coming weeks because it's so big that if we tried to do, I mean, we're already an hour into the program and we've probably got at least another hour left. It's so big that if we tried to explain it all in one shot, everybody's heads would explode and it would just be too much. So we're going to do this in bits and pieces, digestible chunks, as it were. But I want to be very clear. What we're about to talk about tonight is just the tip of the iceberg. So let's start. Because that's what you're all been waiting for. And in order to start, in order to get the conversation that we need to have tonight going, we got to go all the way back to November of last year.
I want to be respectful of the position, but there are certain things that we have been told are that I cannot do. For instance, during the stampede, I was told I could only be in the suites for 20 minutes at a time. When I receive ribbon skirts as a matter of protocol, it's been questioned whether I'm allowed to keep them. They're probably only valued at $40. Been told I can't do dishes in my husband's restaurant, even though I'm volunteering to do that. So I just have to say that I think that there are some tweaks we may need.
Tweaks that we need to make. Just tweaks. No big deal. Except it's a little bit more than tweaks that Danielle Smith made. So let's talk about what the big changes were that Danielle Smith made, because there's some really, really important ones that we got to talk about. The first one is there were some legislative changes that Danielle Smith made. And she justified those in a conversation with the 1%ers. Oh my gosh, how did we miss that joke up until now? The 1%ers, the Rebel News.
That I attend, where there's no ticket charge, where they're free, and I love to go to many of those events. There's some events that do have a ticket charge to them, and I'll be judicious about it. I'll take feedback from the public about what they think is appropriate and what's not, and we'll see if we need to tighten up the rules. But I think what I've seen is that people want me to be out celebrating with them. They want me to be there, whether it's an air show or whether it's a charity fundraiser, or whether it's a hockey game in Edmonton or a hockey game in my own riding. People want me to take part in celebrating with them. So I want to be able to keep on doing that.
So Danielle Smith really wanted to go to the Skyboxes. She wanted to spend more than 20 minutes at a time. She wanted to be with the people at the events, don't you see? And so she made some pretty major legislative changes. One of the first things that she did was she increased the amount that MLAs or elected officials can accept. So if it's under $250, then they don't have to do anything. They can just say, thank you very much. And that's it. If it's greater than $250, but less than $1,000, then they need to record that information and kick that to the ethics commissioner. If it's more than $1,000, they need to record the information and report it within 60 days. Same thing applies in effect for their family. So the first thing that we have to discuss is there used to be a cap for the amount of gifts that MLAs or elected officials could accept. There's no cap anymore. But it wasn't just the changes for MLAs and elected officials. And this is the crux of the one small piece that we're going to talk about tonight, because she also made changes directly. This is Danielle Smith's signature on this document. She made changes to the rules for staffers. And when we take a look at the fine print of that, when it comes to acceptance of fees, gifts, or other benefits, which in theory means anything that a person would be given, Subject to Clause B, members of the Premier's and Minister's staff shall not accept from any individual, organization, or corporation fees, gifts, or other benefits that are connected directly or indirectly with the performance of their duties. So, if it's in any way tied to any kind of government business, they're not supposed to accept gifts of any kind. Period. End of sentence. Unless we have these two little qualifiers. Members of the Premier's and Minister's staff may accept a fee, gift, or other benefit as an incident of protocol of the social obligations that normally accompany employment with the office of the Premier or the office of a cabinet minister if the value of the fee, gift, or other benefit does not exceed $500. A ticket or invitation to an event or conference that is connected directly with the performance of their duties if the value of the ticket or invitation does not exceed $500. So if it's less than $500 and they're there in an official capacity, they're there doing the work of supporting the minister, then they're allowed to accept less than $500. But if it's over $500, members of the Premier and Minister staff may accept a fee, gift, or other benefit referred to in Clause B1 or a ticket or invitation referred to in Clause B2 that exceeds $500 in value after receiving approval from the Premier's Chief of Staff. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. Because the first question that you should be asking is, okay, so the Premier's Chief of Staff, if somebody wants to accept more than something worth $500, then the Chief of Staff has to approve that. The next question should be, what if it's the Chief of Staff who wants to accept a gift more than $500? Well, it would seem that the sole person, according to the regulations that Danielle Smith wrote and signed, who determines whether or not the Chief of Staff can accept gifts more than $500 is the Chief of Staff himself. So there's no conflict of interest there. Nope. No ethical issues there. Nope. But what was the justification for these changes? What was the reason that these changes were needed? Let's ask, I don't know, a certain finance minister. Maybe we could ask Nate Horner.
You said you're happy with the conflict of interest rules as they are. You think they're adequate. Can you explain to Albertans why you think staff members should be able to accept gifts, including potentially from somebody who's involved with government contracts, multi-million-dollar government contracts? Why should those not be disclosed, those gifts disclosed to Albertans?
Well, I would just say I think the Premier, some of the motivation behind changing it was so that she could be staffed at events, because under the prior iteration of the rules, she had a hard time actually getting into events and being staffed. It wouldn't be reasonable for her to attend an event where she couldn't have staff with her. So that was some of the motivation to change the rules. I hope that answers your question.
Well, if it's perfectly reasonable for staff to attend with ministers and with the Premier to these events, if it's important that you guys attend these events, why not just disclose? Why not disclose it? Like, that's the ultimate question that I don't understand why the reason, what the reasoning is behind not disclosing that. If there's nothing wrong with it, why not disclose it proactively?
Well, it's a conversation that I guess we're having here. If there's more changes that need to be made, I'm sure they'll take that into consideration.
Thank you. We'll go to the phones.
You're the senior cabinet
We'll come back
minister.
to the floor after some questions from the phone. Operator, can you please put through our first caller?
I love that little exchange there. But the moral of the story is Minister of Finance, Nate Horner, said it himself. Danielle Smith wants to go to these events. She wants to be able to be staffed at these events, which brings us to semifinal hockey game, game 2 in Vancouver on May 10th, 2024. This is the picture that made the rounds. Danielle Smith. A lot of people in this picture. A lot of fascinating names in this picture. We've got David Eby there. He's the boss of the BC over there. But we have some other people in this picture as well. And it's worth taking a moment to talk about who some of these people have been identified as. Because in addition to Danielle Smith, sitting just beside her executive director of communications, Rebecca Polak, we also have some names that are going to get to be really important as we unpack this whole debacle over the coming weeks. Because right behind Danielle Smith, sitting in that same box, we have Sam Raish of Tylenol fame. We have the president of the Métis Nation of Alberta, We have David Eby. Like I said, we got Rebecca Polak right there. Some big names in that booth in Vancouver on May 10th. So how did Danielle Smith get there with all of those people? Well, fortunately, there's a bit of a public record when it comes to that. According to a July 19th article by the Globe and Mail, they were given to Smith by Invest Alberta board member Sam Jaber, and his accounting firm, Jaberson Associates. To read from the article, Premier Danielle Smith attended a hockey game on personal time. It's personal time. So it's not an official event, apparently. None of her expenses were paid for by the government of Alberta. Oh, so the tickets, where did they come from? Sam Blackett, her spokesperson, told the Globe in a statement on May 13th. Premier Smith traveled with 2 staff, both paid their own expenses. For the travel, presumably. The hockey tickets were provided by a private citizen. All rules under the Alberta Conflicts of Interest Act were followed. We're going to get to that. Jaber and his accounting tax firm, Jaberson Associates, gave the premier the tickets according to the Globe's source. Additionally, in another story published by the Globe in July, Jimmy Smith, a spokesperson for David Eby, said Alberta's premier invited BC's premier to the game in Vancouver. Mr. Eby attended with his wife, son, and 2 staff members, the May 23rd statement said. Premier Smith's office also invited a family from BC who otherwise wouldn't have been able to attend so they could enjoy the experience, the statement said. Premier Smith and Premier Eby had a friendly conversation throughout the game and a brief informal conversation on shared priorities during the intermission. So these are tickets that the Premier of BC would not have been able to acquire on his own. That makes these tickets presumably some pretty high value tickets. But here's the problem. The first of many. Either Smith was staffed or she wasn't. If she was staffed, if she needed her staff to come with her, why did the staff pay for their own airfare? And if she wasn't staffed, if she was just going to the game with some of her besties, with tickets that she was given by Sam Jaber, that's a violation of the first part of those regulations. Let's go back. Subject to Clause B, members of the Premier Minister staff shall not accept from any individual, organization, or corporation fees, gifts, or other benefits that are connected directly or indirectly with the performance of their duties. So, if it wasn't an official event, if those staffers weren't there staffing Danielle Smith, it was a violation of the rules for them to accept those tickets. Period. But this brings up another question. Who is Sam Jaber? And for tonight, just for tonight, we're going to say he's an accountant from the Edmonton area. But there's a lot to unpack with Mr. Jaber. But there's one thing for tonight that's important to know. And it's particularly pertinent to tonight's conversation because Sam Jaber was appointed to the board of Invest Alberta on November 22nd, 2023 by Danielle Smith. Invest Alberta is a crown corporation, which in effect makes Mr. Jaber an employee of Danielle Smith. And even if you don't believe that it's a wild conflict of interest for subordinates to provide lavish gifts to their bosses because that represents a wild conflict of interest, it does. Just imagine what would happen if Mr. Jaber was suddenly appointed board chair by Danielle Smith, who has the power to do that. You don't have to look any farther to realize that there is a very real risk of conflict of interest. But let's take a look at what some other organizations have to say about conflicts of interests and ethics, perhaps. Let's go to a government agency because presumably that would overlap. So going and looking at the Alberta Health Services conflict of interest when it comes to receipts of gifts. AHS representatives may not accept fees, gifts, or other benefits that are connected directly or indirectly with the performance of their AHS duties from any other person other than the normal exchange of hospitality between persons doing business together, tokens exchanged as part of protocol, but not limited, included, but not limited to a gift from a patient, a gift from family, friends, or patient, normal presentation of gifts to persons participating in public functions, awards, speeches, lectures, presentations, or seminars. But there's a dollar value that gets to be real important real quick. The maximum commercial value of any one-time gift, hospitality, or other benefit accepted by an AHS representative must not exceed $100. The total maximum commercial value of any gifts, hospitality, or other benefits accepted by an AHS representative under sections A1 to AC within a calendar year from one source must not exceed $200. That's a government organization. And the rules are clear. You can't accept more than $200 from one source in a calendar year. But here we have Danielle Smith coming into, apparently, a box of seats, compliments of Sam Jaber and Associates, an employee of hers, and her then regifting them to the Premier of BC and apparently to her staff as well. But we don't even have to just rely on the Code of Ethics for Alberta Health Services to determine whether or not this is maybe a little morally shady, maybe a little ethically shady, because it turns out Invest Alberta has their own Code of Ethics as well. And when we take a look at that one, it's pretty clear. Employees or directors shall not accept gifts, hospitality, or other benefits that are or may be perceived as being connected directly or indirectly with the performance of their duties from any individual or organization. Gifts, hospitality, or other benefits may not be of such a nature that could have a real, apparent, or potential influence on the employee or director's objectivity and impartiality in performing their duties on behalf of the Invest Alberta Corporation. The value of gift or benefit permitted shall not exceed $100 Canadian in value from one source per Canada year. The value of a single event invitation, inclusive of admission, travel fees, hospitality, and accommodation, shall not exceed $200. The total value of all event invitations received by the covered individual in a calendar year from a single source shall not exceed $400 Canadian. So even Invest Alberta recognizes that there should be limitations for the value of gifts that are given. That's the Invest Alberta Code of Conduct that I just read to you. Now, there's a lot more to Sam Jaber. And we're either going to be seeing a much more detailed conversation about him in the mainstream media shortly, or we'll be talking about him soon. But tonight, we're here to talk about primarily one thing, Danielle Smith's staffers. Because let's be clear, Danielle Smith was gifted a block of tickets by Sam Jaber's accounting firm. Danielle Smith then invited Dave Eby to attend the game, and in addition, she brought two staffers with her. Travel was reportedly paid for by individuals, but what that means is the Premier of Alberta regifted two Skybox playoff tickets to two staffers. And what are those tickets presumably valued at? When tickets went on for the semifinals, went on sale, according to an article that went up right when tickets went for sale. The cheapest ones, the worst tickets in the house, started at $250. Standard tickets and more expensive seats started at $700. Smith and Company were in an elite Skybox. So it's not a stretch to assume, given that the more expensive seats were $700, that the elite Skybox seats were at least $700 each. That's not a stretch. So given all of that, what do we know? Well, we know that Smith attended multiple playoff games, one in Vancouver and then at least two playoff games in Edmonton with gifted tickets. We know for sure that Smith was accompanied by at least two staffers to one game, and it stands to reason that she would have been staffed potentially or accompanied, depending on how we're choosing to file these gifts of tickets for the other two, Because again, Nate Horner literally said the whole reason why Danielle Smith made these changes was so that she could bring the staffers to the events. She gets lonely. Especially given that in multiple reports from multiple outlets, at least four other ministers attended playoff games. And it's reasonable to assume that in at least some of them, they had been staffed as well. Again, given multiple reports from multiple outlets placing staffers in Skybox suites during playoff games. And this is where the cover-up really starts to become crystal clear. But don't worry, we're going to spell it out. The Edmonton Journal has inquired with each ministry. Journalist Matthew Black has inquired. He has sent emails to every single ministry, including the Premier's office, saying, hey, who went to the games? What were the tickets worth? Would love to know. He's not received a single response, but he hasn't just done it once. He's done it twice. And neither time has he received a single response. So it's very clear at this point that the government, Danielle Smith's UCP government, doesn't want people to know who went. But we thought, what if we come at it another way? There's a great episode of a science fiction show, the values of which Danielle Smith's government would do well to ascribe to. I'm pretty sure it's Star Trek. I was younger when I watched it. But in this particular episode, they were trying to figure out how they're going to find a cloaked ship. See, there was this other ship, and it was cloaked, and that means that they couldn't see it if you're not a big Trekker or Trekkie. And so this other ship was just beating the holy hell out of them because they couldn't see it. And eventually what they realized was that instead of looking for the ship, they should look for where the stars weren't. And they hit that ship. And that strategy still works. As I'm saying this, we have just tweeted out a copy of a FOIP that we filed. And what we asked for in that FOIP goes back to the rules and regulations that Danielle Smith wrote and signed off herself. Because if you go back to the rules and regulations that Smith's own office wrote, any gifts over $500 have to be approved by the Premier's Chief of Staff. So we wondered, how many times has the Premier's Chief of Staff approved these exorbitant and expensive gifts? Because you would think, given the fact that they have a policy for this whole process, they recognize that not having a record of these things would leave a huge conflict of interest. Because otherwise, what would the point of having these regulations be? If you don't have a paper trail where you can say, no, it's cool. Becca, she asked Marshall. Marshall said it was fine. It's all good. It's no big deal. The Chief of Staff approved it. Maybe he even approved his own tickets. Because if it's just the Wild West and anyone can give expensive gifts to the staffers, getting their influence, and by extension of that, the influence of their ministers, that would represent a complete lack of code of conduct and an utter ethical vacuum, right? So we FOIP'd it. And what we got back legitimately shocked us. Now, you might remember a little while back, we did a FOIP where we had we were requested to know who was all involved in Danielle Smith's consultations for her anti-trans, anti-parental choice, anti-medical choice policies. And of the hundreds and hundreds of pages that were relevant, most of those hundreds and hundreds of pages, they deemed that those pages needed to be protected. So they acknowledged that those records existed, but they just said, you can't have them. We've got reasons. You can't have them. The pages that we did get often had huge chunks blacked out where there was privileged information. So they said, you can't be trusted with that information. We don't want the taxpayers of Alberta to know about that information. So we know when there's information that the government deems that they want to hold on to, they'll just redact it. This is the FOIP. This is what we got back. question that we asked. I am seeking all records as defined by Section 1Q of the Act related to any and all exemptions or approvals by the Premier's Chief of Staff in regards to staff members of ministers, MLAs, and the Premier accepting gifts above the value of $500, included for the Chief of Staff and Marshall Smith himself. Please provide the amounts and dates for these exemptions as well as the staff members who received approval for these gifts above and beyond $500. We asked for it for the beginning of that new policy up until the date that we filed the FOIP. So to be clear, what we asked for was all records of all of the gifts that had been approved. The response that we got, a thorough search conducted by Executive Council staff did not yield any records responsive to your request. So what they mean when they're saying that is there are no records of any gifts that have ever been approved. Period. There are no records that exist. It's not that the records were redacted. It's not that the records were withheld. It's that there are no records of any approvals for any gifts. Period. So there's no record that exists, despite the fact that this picture right here shows at least one staffer with Smith in seats at a game that all evidence shows the ticket value exceeded $500, despite the fact that the Premier's own office confirms that two staffers attended that game. And again, even if Smith was the source of these tickets, as per the regulations that her office wrote, those tickets should still have been approved as gifts to staffers. So no matter what, no matter how you choose to slice this, Smith's staffs violated the UCP's own ethics rules, period. We don't need to speculate on that, because if they accepted the gifts and they weren't part of their official duties, they violated the act. If they accepted the gifts and they were part of their official duties, there's no record of any approval for the acceptance of those gifts, which means they violated the rules. There's only a few interpretations of what this can all mean. One is the fact that Smith chooses Skybox seats over the regular tickets shows that she's not even interested in being with the people. She says, the people, they want to see me. They want to know that I'm with them. They want to know that I'm there. But she doesn't want to sit in the regular seats. She doesn't want to sit with the plebs. She's above that. She wants the fancy seats. She wants the Skybox seats. She's not just saying that she's above regular Albertans. She's saying that she's above the rules that she wrote for herself. And if Smith will allow for her office to completely disregard the rules that her office wrote, they made these rules what they wanted them to be. How can any Albertans believe for any amount of time that she will follow any rules that constrain her power? Guardrails are supposed to exist to prevent people from abusing power. Smith hasn't just disassembled the guardrails with her changes to the ethics rules. She wrote the rules. She rewrote the rules. And it appears that she's just driven over the very rules that she wrote. A conflict of interest is defined when, as a public office holder, exercises an official power, duty, or function that provides an opportunity to further his or her private interests or those of his or her relatives or friends, or to improperly further another person's private interests. That's the literal definition of a conflict of interest. Even if you ignore the fact that Smith changing the conflict of interest to suit her needs in and of itself meets the definition of a conflict of interest. Smith has been clear. Getting access to events, elite access to events, is in her private interest. She literally has cited that as the reasons for changing the act. Accepting the tickets to Vancouver or any other games in an unofficial capacity is a conflict of interest. If Smith wasn't on center ice, dropping the puck, or singing the national anthem, or even as being pointed out as a premier present at the games, she can't make the argument that she was performing a duty of her office, period. And neither can any of the other ministers, for that matter. She changed the rules so she could access sports tickets in a manner in which former ethics commissioners and former lawmakers believed was improper. That means that accepting a ticket from anyone is a conflict of interest for, at the very least, her, because she places such a high value on them. It doesn't matter that she has used her authority to rewrite the laws. They broke the rules. They broke the rules that they wrote. Now this is just, like I said, this ain't the ball game. This is just the first inning, because this thing goes so much deeper and it gets so much worse. So we're going to continue the deep dive on this whole scandal over the coming weeks. But here's an important question for people to ponder and to think about. If Danielle Smith was, in fact, gifted the entire Skybox, and if Danielle Smith did indeed invite the people who were in that Skybox as she invited David Eby, why are some of the other people in that Skybox? Because, as we said, not only is the current president of the Métis Nation reportedly been identified in that photo, Sam Raish, the man who facilitated the Turkish Tylenol that cost Albertans almost $100 million in medication that was dangerous for feeding tubes for babies in the NICU, is also in that photo after that whole debacle had already unfolded. The other question is, if Smith didn't bring Sam Raish along for the game, who did? Wonder if there's a connection there. One other little topic that we want to hit on to round the night out, and that is, people have been asking, what do we do? What do we do? There's so much corruption. They don't even follow their own rules. They make up lies to try to cover up things after the fact. They refuse to be accountable for anything. They've literally rewritten the laws so that Alberta has some of the most lenient conflict of interest rules in the country, if not the world, for places that have conflict of interest laws. The laws that exist for MLAs and ministers and the premier are looser than the laws that exist for any other government organization. Why is it that these other government organizations recognize that if you let the people have the opportunity to abuse the power, they'll abuse it? What do we do? Now, there's a bunch of different answers to that questions. I maintain, as I have for a while now, regardless of who's in government, the first thing you have to do is get loud. Well, what does getting loud mean? What does getting loud look like? It means going to rallies. It means letting people know. The people that Danielle Smith is punching down on, whether it's LGBTQ2S plus youth, whether it's refugees, whether it's newcomers, letting them know that you do not share the views of the Premier of Alberta. Letting people know that you believe the more power that you have, the more constraints need to be in place to ensure that when you exercise that power, you do exercise it responsibly. What else can you do? Well, we've been floating this idea for a while now, because there really is only one shot at Danielle Smith, and that is at the upcoming UCP leadership review. That's going to be held in Red Deer. It's in Red Deer. Apparently last week or 2 weeks ago, I may have said Lethbridge. Sorry, everybody. It's in Red Deer. It's very central. There's this UCP leadership review that's going on in Red Deer. And if you buy a UCP membership and you attend that UCP leadership review, the early bird tickets are on sale, I think, till October 6th. Then for $200, you can go and you can send a message to the Premier of Alberta that you will not tolerate this in the province. It's pretty easy to do. If you have the means, if you have $200 extra, and I realize a lot of people don't. If you don't, you don't. That's okay. Don't feel bad about that. But if you do, if you can't afford that $200 to go to Red Deer and send a message, and you just can't get yourself to do it, what you're saying is the lives of those trans kids that Danielle Smith is punching down on, that experts have agreed we're going to see deaths from suicide because of her policies. That's not worth $200 for you. That trans kid's life is not worth $200 for you. Alberta is a province that has seen an alarming rise in hate crimes. Hate crimes are emboldened by the kind of rhetoric that the Premier of Alberta is using. So if you have that $200 and you choose not to utilize it to send a message to the Premier of Alberta, you're saying that if somebody with skin that's not white gets beat down in an alley somewhere, that's not worth $200 to stop. Let's be very, very clear. When we're talking about the expansion of private education in the province of Alberta with public dollars, that is setting up a two-tiered system where the wealthy are going to have more opportunities for their kids because they can afford it, and the money that should be going to support the public system that everybody should have equal access to isn't going to be going there anymore, because it's going to be buying the rich people the buildings now. It's going to be buying the specialized religious schools the buildings now. It is funneling money away from the public system, period. If that's not worth $200 to try and stop, I don't know what to tell you. But there's even a counter argument. And this is fascinating. And this, to me, speaks to what's going on in the province of Alberta as much as anything else that we've talked tonight, perhaps a little bit more, because we were sent this message. Now, the names here have been redacted because reasons, and it's important. Dear so-and-so, it has come to our attention that you recently purchased a membership in the United Conservative Party of Alberta. Welcome. While welcoming of all Albertans who share our principles and goals, we would be remiss in asking if this purchase had been made to a change of heart. Elections Alberta shows you've donated to the NDP in the past, and your social media is replete with commentary in opposition to the UCP. The requirement of being a member of the UCP is to support the principles of the association. Your previous support of the NDP does not seem to indicate you meet this requirement. Could you please respond to this email indicating your support of the party, or we will be forced to continue all other contrary evidence in maintaining a current membership? So let's be clear what we're talking about here, because that is the United Conservative Party saying, hey, we're checking memberships now. We're doing purity tests now. We've just approved as a party this Bill of Rights that say that you shouldn't be profiled, but we're profiling your ass off. Now, here's my argument. Even if you don't agree with the principles of the UCP, and maybe you don't have the $200 to buy the membership and the Red Deer. It's in Red Deer. It's not anywhere else but Red Deer. You don't have the money to go to Red Deer. You don't have the money to get the early bird ticket. That's cool. But this seems like a really fun way to screw with some authoritarians, because if the UCP is now doing purity tests on who applies for its membership, I can think of no better value for my $10, $25, whatever the membership fee is, than to apply to be a member of the UCP party and have them vet me. That sounds like a boatload of fun. Because if they refuse me, I get my money back. And if they don't refuse me, then I can go on and maybe go ahead to send a message to the Premier of Alberta. But here's the kicker to this whole piece before we get to the plugs and the last little bit of fun. I wonder if there's somebody out there who could eloquently speak to the type of entitlement, the type of rule breaking, the type of privilege that we're now seeing from the Alberta Premier's office. If only there was somebody who could either demonstrate that they have a firm grasp of those principles, or perhaps demonstrate that they'll say whatever is most expedient in the moment.
When Albertans see this kind of personal pampering and self-service in their leaders, they lose faith not only in that individual, but in the political and democratic process itself. The lasting effect of this kind of entitlement is a cynical public that believes the worst instead of hoping for the best. We should see the very best of our values and the very brightest of our intentions reflected in our leaders. It's a shame this Premier has let us down. Mr. Speaker, Albertans deserve better.
The Honourable Member Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
Boy, she can read a script, can't she? If only she meant those words. Here at The Breakdown, we do our best to make it clear that what we try to do is well-researched and well-informed commentary. Because we have the highest respect for the work of actual journalism, and we have neither the resources nor the structure of a newsroom, we do our very best to be as upfront as possible with the fact that we do not consider ourselves journalists. What we endeavor to do here is provide well-researched commentary. We strive to be as accurate as we can possibly be. We do all of this so that our commentary and content reflects reality and available facts as much as is possible. Everything that we're presenting tonight, we wholeheartedly believe to be true and in the public interest. And it might even sound a little journalisty. Sorry about that. In the early days of 2020, at the start of the pandemic, Alberta Health Services made the decision to source personal protective equipment, or PPE, from a holding company that was run by someone who, up until that point, predominantly worked in the field of oil field training, bottled water, and underground utility construction. The company that the orders that we're referring to were placed through was a MHCare Holding Corporation. A report by independent journalist Kim Seaver highlighted that the contact for MHCare Holdings Corporation was a Sam Hassan Marash, using an email address from another one of his companies, an oilfield training one, the Carver PA Corporation. Carver PA is a corporation that, by their own description, specializes in providing training to the petrochemical industry. They claim, "We are the only recruiting firm in the petro-energy sector that has an internal technical training and consulting department." That initial purchase of PPE was reportedly for $228 million and included masks, gowns, and thermometers. Most of the supplies were made in China, and there were some pretty significant quality control issues. In fact, the quality control was so bad, it made widespread news. The masks, delivered under the brand name Vanch, were reportedly of such low quality that many didn't even fit the faces of healthcare workers properly. They had nose pieces that unsafely didn't hold their shape, and because of that, couldn't create a seal providing the proper protection for healthcare workers braving the pandemic. Perhaps worst of all, many masks came with an odor that healthcare workers claimed was making them sick. Many have since pointed out the masks were not made by a single manufacturer, but by multiple manufacturers with varying quality and quality issues. Contrary to the Government of Alberta documentation, Vanch is not the name of the manufacturer. It's the brand name of a Chinese stationery group who sourced the masks from anyone who could meet their order and then packaged the masks in their Vanch branded boxes. Nonetheless, AHS continued to use Vanch masks. So to be clear, at the start of the pandemic, when protection for healthcare workers should have been a foremost concern, a company that had no obvious experience or track record in providing healthcare personal protective equipment received a sole-sourced contract for product that turned out, in some cases, to be incredibly substandard and in other cases, allegedly harmful to the very healthcare workers it was supposed to protect. And that company was run by Sam Raish. This sole source contract for problematic PPE was, in effect, the birth of a new company called MHCare Medical under the Mraish Holding Corporation or Mraish Investment Corp umbrella. And it wasn't the last time that they would deliver problematic product to Alberta at great cost to the taxpayer in a high-profile manner. As a fascinating footnote to this part of the story, as the pandemic raged in November of 2020, Sam Raish and Aaron Barner of the Métis Nation of Alberta met with then Cabinet Minister Josephine Pon to discuss the Indigenous Housing Capital Corporation. Remember that name, Aaron Barner, because it gets to be super relevant later. In the summer of 2020, Canada experienced a tridemic, caused by ongoing waves of the Omicron COVID variant, a spike in RSV among children, and an early start to the flu season with a strain of influenza B that particularly affected kids. This caused an unprecedented demand for children's pain and fever medication in the forms of acetaminophen, most commonly known as the brand name Tylenol, and ibuprofen, most commonly known as children's Advil or Motrin. It's also worth noting that over the first half of 2022, most public health measures across Canada, except voluntary vaccination, were abandoned. In August of 2022, Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto recommended parents get prescriptions of those medications to ensure supply in advance of the flu season, even though they are non-prescription over-the-counter medications, and a prescription would not ensure supply if the pharmacist was out of stock. By the time that the Canadian Pharmaceutical Association was able to get out a rebuttal, mass hoarding in advance had already begun, emptying shelves in Eastern Canada and causing a 53% increase in sales in U.S. pharmacies along the border. This caused a nationwide shortage of these two medications heading into the fall respiratory virus season. To make matters worse, the 2022-2023 influenza season started in October, roughly 6 weeks earlier than expected. As soon as pharmacies got stock, people would clean out shelves to stockpile it at home, even if their kids weren't sick. In September of 2022, Health Canada began working with global manufacturers to adapt their products for the Canadian market. By November of 2022, the federal government had approved the import of 9 brand name products from the United States and Australia, resulting in the import of over 4.4 million units over the winter. In parallel, Canadian manufacturers massively ramped up production of these medications under brand names trusted by Canadians, releasing 13.9 million units by May of 2023. Normal demand across Canada for these medications is 300 to 400,000 bottles per year. There is no question that the combination of sudden surge in illness in 2022 plus the hoarding emptied retailers' shelves. But as sharply as that pediatric influenza B spike began in October, it fell in November and largely ended over Christmas. It became obvious over the month of November that Health Canada, pumping the market with imports 10 times the annual demand from multiple manufacturers and countries, would catch up to the market by year-end, especially with the drop in pediatric influenza and the related calming and hoarding. Nonetheless, on December 6, 2022, Premier Daniel Smith and then Health Minister Jason Copping announced that they were signing a deal with a Turkish company, Atabey Pharmaceuticals, for 5 million bottles of children's acetaminophen and ibuprofen to supply to Alberta pharmacies at the cost of at least $80 million.
Your government is taking action to help provide the medication Alberta families need. I'm happy to announce that we have secured a supply of 5 million bottles of children's acetaminophen and ibuprofen for Alberta families. Right now, your government is working with Alberta Health Services and Health Canada on the details and logistics to import this medicine. And you can feel confident that we are all moving as quickly as we can so that Alberta families can get what they need. And it will be available at your local pharmacy in short order once it arrives.
They claimed this medication would be available for import in a few weeks if Health Canada practiced the spirit of cooperative federalism. They also claimed parents would be able to keep their kids out of the hospital if they could buy the medication in pharmacies.
I think one of the reason for this announcement is to make sure that we are providing parents with the medication they need so that they can treat at home and ensure that they can break the fever at home. That's the most important step we can do to keep the pressure off the hospital.
It's important to point out that during this shortage, many physicians issued public statements that while these medications provide comfort care, they aren't life-saving, and they don't halt the progression of a virus. They manage the symptoms. Copping falsely claimed that there was no manufacturer in Canada, even though Johnson & Johnson manufactures their version of these products in Guelph. Copping also falsely claimed Health Canada had approved the raw ingredients from the Turkish manufacturers, but not the final product. Again, the manufacturer was Atabey Pharmaceuticals of Turkey. This is the Turkish Tylenol, which, to be absolutely clear, is nothing more than a little bit of clever wordplay based on alliteration. There were problems from the start. A few of them were pretty funny, most of them were entirely predictable, but ultimately they were all just infuriating. To start with, Atabey is the company that was started by Dr. Oz's family. Yeah, this Dr. Oz. So the jokes on that front pretty much wrote themselves. Alberta has about 700,000 children under the age of 12. The Alberta Pharmaceutical Association claimed they could use about 500,000 bottles if received in December as promised by Smith & Copping, but did not commit to buy any. While Alberta was ordering more bottles than the entire population of the province, 5 million bottles, Premier Smith and Health Minister Copping were confident that Albertans wouldn't be on the hook for the surplus and that Alberta would be able to sell the bottles to other provinces. For additional context, 5 million bottles is about 10 to 14 times the entire national demand for children's pain and fever medications. Between imports and increased domestic production, Health Canada brought in over 18 million bottles that winter. Surplus inventory after the winter was more likely to be a problem than a shortage. Out of the 80 million total budget, the government of Alberta committed to purchase 70 million worth of meds at $14 a bottle, which is about twice the wholesale price and way more than retail price. The other 10 million was for unspecified internal costs. Copping admitted that Alberta taxpayers would have to subsidize the price to other provinces to match their wholesale prices. That wholesale cost of $14 a bottle was and is significantly more than the normal retail cost of the trusted supply that, again, had already seen a huge manufacturing increase a month before this deal was even made. The problems continued. The Atabey dosage was not the same as the North American dosage, which is a safety issue triggering advance warnings from pharmaceutical colleges as well as Alberta Blue Cross. Because of this reason, the Atabey products could only be imported by exceptional import in a process requiring attestation to the shortage by Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health. But there was also the problem that Atabay hadn't supplied medicine to the Canadian market, and their products that Alberta taxpayers had just paid upwards of $100 million for did not meet Health Canada specifications in many ways. Dosage, child safety caps, warnings, dosing devices, packaging, labeling, and more.
We have a statement from Health Canada that says they received proposals by Alberta for the importation of children's ibuprofen and acetaminophen for use in pharmacies, and that a decision was provided to you guys in December. What exactly did that decision say?
There's a couple of things that we had to do in working through with a new supplier. The Health Canada has to go through and examine the manufacturer. They have to examine our import facilities. We had to make sure that the formulation was the same as we would sell for generic products here. We had to get French and English packaging approved. And we went through all of those different steps, and so as a result, we have our first shipment arriving on the weekend. It's going to be for Alberta Health Services use. It's 250,000 bottles. The remaining 4.750 bottles is 4.750 million bottles are going to be subject to an additional delay because for retail use you have to have a child-proof cap. As I understand it, we are working on making sure that that approval process is taking place. And so that'll be the second batch. And as soon as we know when the retail use is going to be available, we'll do another press release. But the good news is that our Alberta Health Services hospitals will have the first shipment by this weekend.
Well, I'm talking specifically about pharmacies. So those are supposed to be on the shelves by Christmas is what you guys said. They aren't on the shelves. So I'm just wondering, so how I understand it is that it was actually rejected, that proposal in December, and then you had to put forward a new proposal. Is that correct?
No, it was just a process we went through. I mean, we respect Health Canada has a role in making sure that we have the safest product possible on the shelf. And the issue that they had was that when you make a product available for a retail use, it has to have a child-proof cap. So we're just working with the manufacturer to make sure that that is in place so that we can make it available for retail use. And look, I don't want to rush Health Canada. Certainly want to make sure that people, as soon as the supply arrives, that they feel confident in it. It really was just a matter of us meeting the regulatory conditions, and that was the last condition we needed to meet.
So you had to put forward a new application.
We've been working with them right from the beginning. We always knew that we would have a certain amount that would arrive that would be for AHS use, and then we had to continue working with them to make sure that we had the bottling that met their specifications. One of the specifications was we had to make sure that it was listed in the same familiar type of formulation that we have in Canada. We had to make sure French and English labeling, and this last hurdle is we just have to make sure we've got the child-proof cap. So it's been a process that we've been going on. It's just taken a little bit longer than we expected, but the first shipment is arriving this weekend for Alberta Health Services.
Just to confirm, this is the same application that came back in December.
I've been working with this on this all the way along. We have been working with Alberta Health Health Canada to make sure that we were meeting all of their compliance. It's a brand new supplier. There's just a couple of hurdles that we needed to get through, and we're almost on the last one.
The medication itself didn't even start to arrive until January, but because of issues with the labeling and the dosing, that first shipment of 250,000 bottles could only be distributed to Alberta hospitals, where nurses could be trusted to perform the extra work of converting the dosage before administering the medication to patients. Medication for the public to purchase in pharmacies didn't arrive until late March, 2 months after Health Canada allowed another exceptional import and well after the shortage of the trusted brand name supply had been resolved. The medication had to be stored behind the counter as the pharmacists were required to teach parents how to adjust the dosage. But the problems didn't stop there. Because of the delay in the shipments and the wrong dosage, no other provinces had any interest in buying them. Also, since Health Canada has not provided regulatory approval for any Atabay product at a national level, any other province could only get them on a case-by-case applications to Health Canada again for exceptional import, which again would require a shortage. Alberta was ultimately only able to import 1.5 million of the 5 million bottles purchased because the shortage justifying the exceptional import had ended, and Health Canada never provided approval for anywhere other than Alberta. New Health Minister Adriana LaGrange directed this massive overbuy to Alberta hospitals. This inventory was dumped into AHS books, even though AHS never had a shortage, had its own suppliers through 2022 and 2023, and the original stated intent for these medications was that they had been purchased for retail sales in pharmacies. Perhaps most concerning, though, the medication that was distributed to hospitals for use was only approved for ages 2 and up. AHS determined that because of its consistency, if used with newborn babies in the neonatal intensive care units, it could place those newborns at a risk of a condition called necrotizing enterocolitis, which literally kills the intestines of infants when used through feeding tubes. Alberta Health Services discontinued the use of the medication entirely. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. All told, Alberta hospitals only used the medications for only 2 months before returning to its already established supply. But that only further underscores the question. If the medication was originally purchased with the intent to be distributed in pharmacies for the public to buy, why was it ever redirected to the hospital supply, if not just because Smith needed a cheap victory lap? Alberta only received 1.5 million bottles of the 5 million bottles that the province paid for. Of that 1.5 million, only a total of 4,700 bottles made it to community pharmacies for the public, and only 9,000 bottles made it into hospitals across the province. Alberta ended up paying to store the rest of the medication and has no means by which to get back any of the money spent, which means that, in effect, given that only 13,700 bottles ever made it into any kind of circulation, Danielle Smith paid $5,839.42 per bottle using taxpayers' money. We call it Tylenol, but what was the official name of the medication? Appropriately enough, payroll. Or maybe it's parole. We like payroll. Although the government tried to hide the existence of a middleman, who allegedly orchestrated this entire deal and has since been confirmed to be the importer, MHCare Medical, the company owned by Sam Raish. They received the $70 million from Alberta Health. It is unknown how much of that they paid to Atabay for the 1.5 million bottles actually shipped. It's also unknown whether the 5 million bottle minimum purchase was required by Atabay or by MHCare Medical. Even after the safety debacle with the masks and the PPE, the government still decided to use Mauritius' company in a sole-sourced contract through AHS to obtain children's medication. The products never received regulatory approval. They had the wrong dosage despite a custom manufacturing run, and multiple shipments were required to get the safety caps and labeling right, seemingly by trial and error, requiring secure disposal. Again, all paid for by Alberta taxpayers. Some have since speculated that individuals within the UCP government had attempted to purchase the 5 million bottles of Atabay product through Maurice in order to bootstrap MHCare Medical into the role of being a national distributor of pharmaceutical products, starting with the children's acetaminophen, in the hopes that there was still a shortage when the imports finally arrived. But taxpayers carried all the risk of that minimum buy, of the failure to meet the regulatory requirements, and of demand drying up by the late arrival of the product, all of which occurred. It was an entirely predictable $80 million catastrophe. The mismanagement of the government and MHCare Medical caused both the government and MHCare to fail at establishing MHCare as a distributor of pharmaceuticals, assuming that was their goal. To this day, they only have a Health Canada license to import and not to distribute or retail, and do not list any pharmaceuticals for sale. Let's use a recent example of how inconsistent all of this is with standard practice. Earlier in October of this year, Jennifer Lee at the CBC revealed that Adriana LaGrange had let the vaccine distribution contract to physicians' offices with a well-established company, Accuristics, expire in April of 2024 without any extension or replacement. Alberta Health did not even put out a request for proposal or RFP. This meant that physicians had not been able to administer even Alberta's schedule of routine childhood vaccinations for 7 months, and now couldn't provide the fall 2024 flu, COVID, or RSV shots either. When questioned about this, LaGrange gave the excuse that the incumbent distributor had unspecified quality and safety issues.
So the contract with the distributor expired months ago, sort of back in April, and the government's request for an expression of interest was posted in August. So I'm wondering why it took so long for that to happen, for steps to be taken to find a distributor so vaccines could go to these clinics in time for the fall immunization campaign, and so that doctors could distribute other publicly funded vaccines as well.
Well, my understanding is that the reason why the contract was not renewed was because of quality and safety issues with that particular distributor, and so there is a process that we have to go through in government to have a competitive RFP process that has to be gone through, and so that has been gone through. And my understanding is that at this point in time, we are looking to supply those roughly 250 clinics with the product, but we have over 2,000 access points for immunization that are available across this province. Those clinics represent roughly about 5% of the overall immunization that we provide across the province, and it is very important, and so we are working actively to make sure that they do have product via a different route. But at this point in time, as I say, the contract did end with that distributor because of a safety and quality issue.
Lee asked the rejected distributor about this, and Accuristix explained the only issue they had over 3 years of delivering over 800,000 doses of all vaccines was a temporary issue, with 1% of the COVID-19 doses having a rise in temperature above the ultra-cold storage requirement. These doses never made it to the public. Accuristix refunded AHS for the cost of the storage, and AHS continued to work with Accuristix after that. So one has to wonder, if the vaccine distributor was not provided a chance to renew or bid on a new contract because of an issue with 1% of the doses that never even reached the public and didn't cost taxpayers any money, how is it that SamRaish and MHCare Medical keep getting more contracts after their Vanch masks failed to meet the required ASTM standard? Most of them wouldn't fit or hold any shape, and many of them caused breathing issues and skin rashes in healthcare workers. And after 100% of the children's acetaminophen product failed to have the standard dosage, was never approved by Health Canada outside of exceptional circumstances, was months too late, and effectively cost $80 million to only get 13,700 bottles to hospitals or pharmacies. Why the massive double standard? Just a couple of months after the Tylenol deal was announced, SamRaish received the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Medal from UCP Minister Mohammed Yassin in a ceremony that was quickly posted to the MHCare promotional website and their YouTube.
We have here MLA Mohammed Yassin from Calgary. Welcome. He is part of a nomination for SAM for the Platinum Jubilee Award.
I am so pleased today to recognize Sam for the part of work that he has done on behalf of Lieutenant Governor here in this province, and behalf of government here. And this award, Platinum Jubilee Award, recognizes about 7,000 volunteers, will recognize 7,000 people in Alberta who have done exceptional work in uplifting, helping people.
This is a very proud moment for me, and something that means a lot. And this is the land of opportunity where generational change is possible. Because we were given an opportunity to succeed in this province, it's allowed us an opportunity to go back and give back to the community. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
There's no advertising like free advertising, after all. SamRaish has won more than $250 million in sole source contracts from Albertans to supply medication that was only used in the hospital for 2 months, was minimally used in pharmacies that no other province wanted, and masks and other PPE that healthcare workers call at least problematic. We don't know how much he personally profited off of these deals, but we assume Bentley's private plane flights and box seats aren't cheap. It's also perhaps noteworthy that there's no record that we could find of either MHCare, Carver, or of any of Mauritius' subsidiaries involved in the masks or Tylenol registered in the Alberta Lobbyist Registry. That lack of any lobbying footprint stays important for a lot of what we're talking about tonight. Lobbying, in the absence of a public request for a proposal or RFP, is one of the more common ways that businesses pitch their wares to government. Lobbying is the process of trying to convince the government that you're the ones that they should be doing business with. And because that business is done with taxpayer dollars, there are rules for how lobbying has to be done and how it has to be tracked. So how did the precursor of MHCare get involved in the Vanch mask deal, and how did MHCare get involved in the Tylenol deal? We have no idea. But that brings us to what is going to be the centerpiece of this episode. This picture. On May 10th, Danielle Smith flew to Vancouver with 2 staffers and an impressive entourage to watch a game in an elite private skybox with tickets that were gifted to her by a private citizen. Tonight, we're finally peeling back as many of the layers of this onion as we can and strap in, because this is going to be a long and wild ride. It's okay to take breaks if you have to. It was reported very early on that the elite private Skybox tickets were gifts to Danielle Smith by a private citizen, one Sam Jaber. The fact that Smith accepted these tickets is a problem in and of itself, or at least it would be almost anywhere else in Canada. But let's go back to November of 2023, where Danielle Smith explained the changes that she wanted to make to the conflict of interest rules.
I have to tell you, I want to be respectful of the position, but there are certain things that we have been told are that I cannot do. For instance, during the stampede, I was told I could only be in the suites for 20 minutes at a time. When I receive ribbon skirts as a matter of protocol, it's been questioned whether I'm allowed to keep them. They're probably only valued at $40. Been told I can't do dishes in my husband's restaurant, even though I'm volunteering to do that. So I just have to say that I think that there are some tweaks we may need so that we are able to go to that. I think the issue was whether, I don't want to go to a game and then only be able to stay in a suite for 20 minutes, right? So I declined, but if we can address some of those issues, I think most people expect that as a matter of course, as premier or as a minister, you have to do some of these things because it's such a great celebration of everything we have in Alberta. Yeah. So we have to make some changes to the rules.
I get the no doing dishes thing because when the premier of Alberta posts a photo doing dishes and the restaurant's up for sale at the same time, and then people know that it's the premier's restaurant or the premier's spouse's restaurant, I don't know. Maybe that's marketing. I don't know what it is, but I can understand the justification. I can't understand the justification. I remember Jason Kenney, was it the Grey Cup? Wasn't it the Grey Cup? Jason Kenney wearing the I Love Canadian Oil and Gas hoodie when he did it doesn't make sense to me. I spoke personally with several government ministers at the Heritage Classic. I know they were there, and the premier can't be there. I'm going to go so far as to say I heard the commissioner of the National Hockey League was pretty pissed off. Did you hear that?
Well, he did call and ask me if I could go, and I just said I didn't think I'd be able to get ethics commissioner approval on that. But to the credit of Explore Edmonton, because I spoke with them yesterday, they did a lot of work with the ethics commissioner to get a number of tickets that I think were valued at $170 each, and so they were below the $200 limit. So a number of my colleagues were able to go. But you know what? I just I'm trying. I want to stay within the rules, but sometimes if the rules haven't kept up with where we find ourselves today, we may have to adjust them.
Yeah, I think you're trying to get $1 billion arena built down in Calgary, and the commissioner of the league's in, and the eyes of the hockey world are on the Metro Edmonton region. I'd suggest the premier should be there.
To be clear, a conflict of interest occurs when an individual becomes unreliable because of a clash between personal interests and professional duties or responsibilities. Another way to say that is if you can't clearly tell what a person's motives are for doing what they're doing, because they could have multiple motives, including gain for people other than the ones they're supposed to be working for, they're in a conflict. That also includes personal gain. Danielle Smith made it very clear that box seats were a high-value item for her, and she changed the rules and laws to get them. That's a pretty big conflict of interest in and of itself. Nonetheless, Danielle Smith made her sweeping changes to the limits for gifts that MLAs could accept, but also made some pretty drastic changes to the rules for staffers as well. Gifts for elected MLAs used to be limited to a $200 value, with gifted tickets to events capped at $400. Smith completely removed limits for MLAs and ministers, requiring only that the gifts must be reported to the Ethics Commissioner. For context, federal law prohibits MPs from accepting gifts worth more than $40 from industry stakeholders and registered lobbyists. For staffers, Smith initiated rules that state that staff could only accept gifts if it was in the performance of their official duties. The gift of the tickets to Smith and then to her staff is a violation of normal practice. And while it may not be a direct violation of the rules that Smith rewrote for herself, there's no doubt that the fact that 2 of her staff accepted the gifts was a violation. Here's how. Sam Jaber is quite literally an employee of Danielle Smith. He was appointed to the board of Invest Alberta on November 22, 2023 by Danielle Smith. Invest Alberta is a Crown corporation, which means that it is owned by the people of Alberta. And the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, determines who is appointed to the board, who gets to be the board chair, and most importantly, who is removed from the board. So an employee of the Premier gifted her thousands of dollars worth of hockey tickets. Extravagant gifts from employees to direct supervisors or employers is a major conflict of interest, as it creates the opportunity for decisions to be made about that employee's performance, not based on how well they do their job, but the fact that the employer, in this case Smith, gets things. This is basic ethics and professional practice. Whether you accept Jaber as an employee of Smith or not, Invest Alberta does have its own code of conduct as required by all Alberta Crown corporations, and Jaber seems to be violating several provisions of that code of conduct. For example, under Section 2.1 Acceptable Behavior, E. Do not use your position to promote personal interests or bypass IAC's procedures for personal gain or the benefit of your family, friends, or colleagues, and do not accept or provide gifts or favors in exchange for, where it may appear to be in exchange for, special treatment or influence. Under Section 2.10, Disclosure of Conflicts of Interest, covered individuals must disclose to their code administrator all matters which would create a reasonable apprehension of bias in the performance of their duties under the Act, including any real, potential, and/or perceived conflicts of interest. Jaber offering up these tickets in the first place is a demonstration of a clear violation of the Invest Alberta Code of Conduct because, as we'll show, Jaber indeed had friends and colleagues in that box. Smith accepting these tickets demonstrates a clear ethical failure that would never be tolerated in any serious section of the private sector. But Smith didn't just put herself in a compromising position. She gifted 2 tickets to 2 staffers, her Executive Director of Communications, Becca Polak, and her Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith. This created a series of major problems. First of all, the rules for staffers are that unless they are acting in an official capacity, staffing ministers or the Premier, they are not to accept tickets to events as gifts. The statement that was released by the Premier's office to the Globe and Mail makes it clear the trip was on personal time. If that's actually true, the gift of tickets from Smith to her staff should have never been accepted because that's what the rules that Smith herself wrote say. When staffers are acting in an official role, if tickets exceeded $500 in market value, which these private elite Skybox seats certainly did, approval is required. That approval, and another stunning ethical failure, needs to come from the Chief of Staff to the Premier, Marshall Smith. That's right. Marshall Smith, who received the gift of the tickets, would have to approve the gift he was receiving was acceptable, which is in and of itself another massive conflict of interest. But he didn't even do that. How do we know? We filed a Freedom of Information request to see what tickets and gifts had been approved by Marshall Smith from the time these rules came into effect to the end of August 2024. There are no records of any approvals. So no matter what, the rules that are designed to ensure that staffers behave in an ethical way were broken. And they were broken with Smith as a clear accomplice because she was sitting right beside Becca at that hockey game. And as we've said, she's reportedly the one who gave them the tickets. But that's not all. Because we wanted to verify the account that Danielle Smith's press secretary provided to the Globe and Mail. So we filed another Freedom of Information Act request asking for the details for how travel and hotels were arranged. It turns out that despite the fact that the attendance of the game happened on personal time, the arrangements for hotels were booked through government channels and initially paid for on a single government purchasing card, enjoying the tax breaks that come with purchasing for government business. The statement Smith's office provided to the Globe and Mail was on May 13th and claimed that Premier Smith traveled with 2 staff, both paid their own expenses. But it wasn't until May 15th that internal government communications clarified that Becca Polak and Marshall Smith needed to be billed for the hotels. Even more complicating is the fact that while we received confirmation that Becca Polak did reimburse taxpayers for her trip, we didn't receive anything saying the Premier's former Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith, did. So no matter what, the Premier's office lied to the Globe and Mail and to Albertans. No matter what, by passing these tickets on to Becca Polak and Marshall Smith, the Premier of Smith incited them to break the very ethics rules that she had just finished rewriting. And let's be very clear here. They could have followed their own rules by claiming that Becca and Marshall were staffing Smith in an official capacity and by having Marshall approve the gifts. But all of the available evidence strongly shows they just couldn't be bothered. And worse, when caught, there's a very reasonable argument to be made. They just tried to cover it up. But that's just the start. Because now we need to go back to the photo. Because the photo appears to be a peek into the sprawling network that Sam Raish has built for himself. And we want to be very clear that what we're presenting here is only what we know and can prove. We're not claiming that it's an exhaustive or complete look at the Raish business empire. So who is all here? And who is here but not? We've got the Executive Communications Director, Becca Polak. We've got Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta. Those are the easy ones. But here's where it starts to get wild. In the back row, we have Aaron Barner, Senior Executive Officer for the Métis Nation of Alberta. Then Sam Raish, then Andrea Sandmeyer, the President of the Métis Nation of Alberta, and then Sam Raish's wife. Also in the picture is David Eby and his family, as well as, reportedly, Ayman Hamer, who has been a Vice President at MHCare Medical. But the key to understanding all of the invisible connections in this picture is the person who isn't even in the picture. The person who made the whole picture possible. And that person is Sam Jaber, the man who gave Danielle Smith the Skybox tickets that she then seems to have re-gifted. We've already addressed the fact that Sam Jaber is in effect an employee of Danielle Smith because he was appointed by her to the board of Invest Alberta in November of 2023. But Mr. Jaber is a great deal more than that. Mr. Jaber is a businessman and accountant who, from everything that we can tell, lives and works in the Edmonton area. But it's the type of business that he seems to be predominantly engaged in that makes him so important in understanding the hidden dynamics in the picture. Because Sam Jaber's primary business appears to be the accounting firm Jaberson and Associates. That business is run out of an industrial office strip mall at 5430 136th Ave Northwest, Edmonton. The other business run out of that address is Phoenician Accounting and Tax Services, who Jaber also appears to have been the principal of, based on the fact that he regularly cross-posts for Jaberson and Associates on the Phoenician Facebook page and is the only public admin of that Facebook page. Jaberson and Associates and Phoenician share a business address, phone number, and a client portal that says, "Welcome to the Jaberson and Associates client portal," but is hosted on the Phoenician website. And while Phoenician now seems to be largely defunct, the logo for Phoenician remains on the office. It's a little confusing, we know. There's a lot of accounting services that a qualified accountant can provide. One of them is managing corporate registrations. And this is where a lot of the connections in that picture start to make sense. It's common practice for corporations to use their accounting office for the storage of their records. That's important to keep in mind for the rest of this story, because there are 4 numbered companies that jumped out at us that were registered by Sam Jaber in September of 2023, just 2 months before Jaber was appointed to Invest Alberta. The records address for all 4 companies are Sam Jaber's offices. All 4 of these numbered companies use the contact email address coresco@carvercorporation.com. An online search reveals that Alicia Coresco used to be a payroll physician for Phoenician Accounting, an accountant with Carver, and a senior accountant with MHCare Medical. The registered office for all 4 companies is number 300, 14815 119th Avenue Northwest, again in Edmonton. In a wild coincidence, that address is also the location of the Carver Building, a 3-story office block that also serves as the headquarters for MHCare and the Carver PA Corporation. Weird, huh? Yeah, that's the same Carver Corporation that Sam Raish used as his contact throughout the Vance debacle before he converted the Raish Holding Company to MHCare Medical Corporation in 2020. So, to recap, there is now proof that Sam Raish, whose companies provided controversial products on not 1 but 2 high-profile occasions, and who has presumably made a boatload of money off of those deals on the taxpayer dime, has a long-standing business relationship with Sam Jaber. Sam Jaber gave Danielle Smith expensive elite Skybox tickets, even though he was her employee, and by any normal business practice, that represents a huge conflict of interest. So even with what we've presented just so far, we've got some pretty major problems. But of course, there's a whole lot more. Let's go back to those 4 companies for a second, take a look at who is all involved, because there's 4 additional names we haven't mentioned yet. D'Arcy Durand, Kenneth Hawkins, Leslie Sheeler, and Blaine Iskew. Dr. D'Arcy Durand is an orthopedic surgeon who is also the head of the Alberta Surgical Group, a chartered surgical facility. He's been a major advocate for the advancement of private surgical facilities. Dr. Kenneth Hawkins is an anesthesiologist currently practicing in Edmonton. Dr. Leslie Sheeler is also an anesthesiologist from Edmonton. So let's talk about the Alberta Surgical Group for a few minutes. Alberta Surgical Group was listed in a November 2020 Press Progress article as one of the most prolific lobbyists of Tyler Shandro during his notorious run as health minister. From that story, Alberta Surgical Group Limited, a private company run by a number of anesthesiologists at the University of Alberta, was incorporated in February of 2020. The company has lobbied the government 3 times since March. In October, the company lobbied to achieve contracted arrangements with Alberta Health and Alberta Health Services in relation to an unspecified non-hospital surgical facility. Corporate records list 3 doctors as the company's directors, including Dr. D'Arcy Durand, an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Kenneth Hawkins, and Dr. Leslie Sheeler from the University of Alberta Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry's Department of Anesthesiology. In November of 2022, Alberta Surgical Group held a launch event for their new chartered surgical facility in the Ellerslie neighborhood of southeast Edmonton. New Health Minister Jason Copping attended, as well as former Justice Minister Casey Madu, where they participated in a photo. Oh, sorry, not that photo. That's Sam Raish attending Casey Madu's King Council designation. Whoops. This is the photo from that event. The Ellerslie facility has 5 operating rooms, and according to ASG, around 5,000 surgeries are expected to be scheduled there each year. Patients will get care under the public system, with ASG operating under a contract with Alberta Health Services. The company website lists only 2 founders, Dr. Durand as surgical director and Dr. Sheeler as medical director. And who is that prolific lobbyist from that Press Progress story who did all that prolific lobbying for Alberta Surgical Group? The firm P3 Capital Partners Incorporated. Who's the chairman of P3 Capital Partners? Doug Horner. Wait, that last name sounds familiar. Doug Horner was an MLA representing Spruce Grove from 2001 to January 2015. He was the president of the Treasury Board and Minister of Finance until Jim Prentice's cabinet was sworn in on September 15, 2014. Doug Horner's family is very politically active in Alberta. His cousin, Nate Horner, has been the MLA for Drumheller-Stettler since 2019 and a cabinet minister since July 2021. In June 2023, Danielle Smith appointed him president of the Treasury Board and Minister of Finance, just like his cousin 10 years prior. P3 Capital Partners lobbied the following government departments between the start of their undertaking for Alberta Surgical Group in February 2020 and are still listed as lobbyist of record for the Alberta Surgical Group: Alberta Infrastructure, Alberta Health, Alberta Health Services, Alberta Treasury Board, and Finance. What is P3 lobbying the government for? A non-hospital surgical facility to achieve contracted arrangements with Alberta Health and Alberta Health Services. The guideline or directive: request for expression of interest, non-hospital surgical facilities, services to achieve contracted arrangements with Alberta Health and Alberta Health Services. So, during part of the time, Doug Horner's firm has been lobbying Alberta Treasury Board and Finance, among other departments. His cousin Nate Horner has been the president of the Treasury Board and Minister of Finance. To be clear, there's no direct evidence that the four companies that Maurice is listed on as a shareholder and owner of, with the gentlemen who want to expand chartered surgical facilities in Alberta, is part of the lobbying efforts that P3 is undertaking. But if any of those companies are pursuing or looking at pursuing any kind of chartered surgical facility, or any business at all with the government for that matter, it's not a great look, is it? At the very least, a business partner in four companies with those physicians invited Nate Horner to hockey games, and Nate Horner has confirmed he attended 2 of those games.
You attended hockey games with MHCare, Samrish. I'm wondering which games you went to and how many.
I did attend 2 Oilers games with MHCare. I went to a game in the first round and a game in the third. I don't have the exact dates on me, but it's was all within the rules and will be disclosed on my ethics commissioner statement.
You have a follow-up?
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much for answering that, Minister. It's been tricky getting ministers to answer that question. We can't get answers out of the Premier's office. It will never be public what games staff went to under the current rules. Do you think that the current rules need to be revised?
The rules were just revised. I can't speculate on.
But do you believe the current version of these rules is adequate? Now that we've, in retrospect, after the past couple months and seeing the resistance from this government to disclose who went to games and who hosted, do you think that the rules are serving Albertans?
Does this feel like resistance?
Yes, I've been trying to get a hold of you for 2 months. You hung up on me once, Minister. I've been trying to get a hold of you. I've been emailing you. We've reached out repeatedly to the Premier's office without answer. Do you believe, are you comfortable with the current version of these rules guarding your conflicts of interest?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Carrie. Next question.
How is that not lobbying, a clear conflict of interest, or at the very least a profound ethical failing? How does Nate Horner end up at 2 games with a person that closely connected to companies that are a part of the expansion of privately delivered healthcare in the province of Alberta, and neither he nor his staff apparently had any idea?
Well, when you were meeting with Sam Marish and his boss, did you push him to get some sort of value out of the $80 million for the Tylenol that put children at risk? What did you do in that moment as finance minister?
I'm not going to comment about any private Alberta citizens. You know, I'd never met the man before, and he offered the ticket, and I went.
Thanks. We're done.
Because when we take a look at the criteria that have to be in place before MLAs can accept these sorts of gifts, it's very hard to see how any of these circumstances meet that criteria in any way. Let's take a look at the Conflict of Interest Act. gifts, benefits from persons other than the Crown. A member breaches this act if the member, or to the knowledge of the member or the member's spouse or adult interdependent partner or minor child, accepts from a person other than the Crown a fee, gift, or other benefit that is connected directly or indirectly with the performance of the member's office. So to be super clear, an MLA or minister is not allowed to accept gifts that are connected directly or indirectly with their office unless they are of certain value in the performance of their duties. In part because Smith changed the regulations so that gifts of elite tickets can be accepted if the elected official is accepting them in the course of their duties. Also from the Conflicts of Interest Act, Subsection 1 does not apply to a fee, gift, or other benefit that is accepted by the member or the member's spouse or adult independent partner or minor child as an incident of protocol or of the social obligations that normally accompany the member's office. If Horner was there in his capacity as a minister, and someone is trying to make the argument that this was an incident of protocol or normal social obligations, you have to wonder what the protocol was that saw him accepting tickets from someone he says he knew nothing about.
Well, when you were meeting with Sam Marish in his box, did you push him to get some sort of value out of the $80 million for the Tylenol that put children at risk? What did you do in that moment as finance minister?
I'm not going to comment about any private Alberta citizens. You know, I'd never met the man before, and he offered the ticket, and I went.
Thanks. We're done.
And if Horner was there in his official capacity, then there are real questions about whether he was being lobbied by Marish. But Marish isn't registered as a lobbyist, so at a certain point, what is even going on here? We've said it before, and we'll say it again. Either Horner and his staff are unbelievably incompetent, or they're just lying. And we still haven't gotten to Blaine. You know, the fourth person involved in those 4 corporations that Marish set up with the owners of Alberta Surgical Group. Because Blaine Iskew, another partner in these 4 seemingly medical companies, is particularly interesting in his own right. According to his LinkedIn, he was formerly involved in strategic and clinical contracting for AHS right up until roughly the same time Sam Marish's Turkish Tylenol deal was announced, at which point he jumped ship to MHCare, where he has since been a strategic business consultant. By August of 2024, he became executive vice president and spoke publicly for the company at PR events. And if you're bumping on the fact that a potentially key figure in the Tylenol acquisition suddenly jumped to MHCare immediately after the ink was dry, you're not alone. We bumped too. We tried to reach out to Blaine to confirm whether or not he was involved in the Tylenol, directly or indirectly, and he didn't reply to us. Do with that what you will. So to recap again, Sam Jaber and Sam Marish are business buddies. Sam Jaber set up 4 companies for a group of physicians and anesthesiologists, 2 of which included Sam Marish on the board of directors, and all of which have a numbered company for which Sam Marish is the sole shareholder, as owning voting shares in varying amounts across those 4 numbered companies. Yeah, you heard that right. 226-2576 Alberta Limited is a majority shareholder in 2 of the doctor companies that we talked about earlier and a part owner in all of the ones that we found. The sole shareholder and owner of 226-2576 is none other than Sam Marish. All of this was done in October of 2023, 1 month before Sam Jaber was appointed to Invest Alberta by Danielle Smith, and roughly 6 months before Sam Jaber gave presumably thousands of dollars of playoff tickets to Danielle Smith. It's also worth noting again that it was in November of 2023 that Danielle Smith announced that she would be making those sweeping changes to the Conflict of Interest Act, allowing for exorbitant gifts at a level that previously would have been illegal, and those changes were completed in just a few weeks. The lobbyist for at least one of the other related companies, Alberta Surgical Group, is the cousin of the current finance minister. The business partner in 4 other companies with the docs who run the Alberta Surgical Group has gifted tickets to the finance minister, Nate Horner. Danielle Smith accepted tickets from the accountant who set up those 4 companies. So if any of these 4 companies were set up to pursue additional expansion of privately delivered healthcare, it totally appears that Danielle Smith accepted tickets from the company's accountant, who also happens to be one of her employees, And the finance minister accepted tickets from a business partner of someone who currently owns a company lobbying his department, and that lobbying is being done by the finance minister's own cousin. You can see why we needed more yarn. But wait, there's more. Because, as it turns out, all four of those seemingly medical companies set up by Sam Jaber used a Carver Corporation email address. You know, the same kind of email address that Sam Raish used when he was first setting up the Vanch Masks deal. And their business address is the same building as both Carver and MHCare. So let's talk about the Carver Corporation again for a sec. Carver is a corporation that by their own description specializes in providing training to the petrochemical industry. Again, they claim, we are the only recruiting firm in the petro-energy sector that has an internal technical training and consulting department. We pulled that description from their website just a few days ago. Which is weird, because again, on November 5th, 2020, then UCP Minister Josephine Pon put up that Facebook post thanking Sam Raish with Carver Corporation and Aaron Varner with the Métis Nation for inquiring about the Indigenous Housing Capital Program. And yes, that's almost certainly the same Aaron Varner from the Skybox pic. So right out of the gates, we can say that the relationship between Varner and Raish seems to go back more than a couple of years. But how close are they? Aaron Varner and Sam Raish were both named directors for the Métis Strategic Service Corporation in March of 2021. Additionally, Varner's email is listed as the contact info for a numbered company out of Edmonton, which appears to have its sole officer as a relative of his, although he's not listed on that company, but it's his email address, which seems weird. And yes, before you ask, it appears that this company was set up by Sam Jaber as well. But what's really bizarre is that another numbered company has a lease agreement with the Métis Nation of Alberta for a 5-year lease valued at $2.2 million. Anyone want to guess what the company that is? 226-2576 Alberta Limited. That's right, the company of which Sam Raish is the sole shareholder. So Sam Raish started the Métis Strategic Corporation with Varner in 2021 after they both had a meeting with then Minister Josephine Pon, and somehow Sam Raish has landed a $2.2 million contract from the Métis Nation starting in 2025. The Métis Nation of which Varner is Senior Executive Officer. Aaron Varner, who was the business partner of Sam Raish in the Métis Strategic Service Corporation, and who is sitting on one side of Sam Raish in the Skybox, while the president of the Métis Nation sits on Sam Raish's other side. So it's starting to look a lot like it pays to have the right friends. But is it more than just Varner and Raish winning? Time for another recap, because yes, this is a lot. But at the end of the day, Sam Raish has had over $250 million in taxpayer business with, let's go with, controversial results. His accountant and company setter-upper gave Smith super expensive Skybox hockey tickets. That same accountant was appointed to a cushy board position with Invest Alberta by Danielle Smith just before Danielle Smith changed the conflict of interest laws so that she could get super expensive Skybox hockey tickets. Sam Raish has used that same accountant and company setter-upper to set up multiple companies with surgeons and anesthesiologists already in the business of expanding privately delivered, publicly funded, for-profit healthcare. The lobbying company that those surgeons and anesthesiologists hired to lobby the government for more government contracts, expanding privately delivered, publicly funded, for-profit healthcare is the cousin of the finance minister. The finance minister attended 2 elite games as a guest of Sam Raish, who again is in business with those doctors advocating for privately delivered, publicly funded, for-profit healthcare. And the Métis Nation of Alberta has signed a $2.2 million contract for a lease with the business partner of Senior Executive Officer for the Métis Nation of Alberta, who is again Sam Raish. And apparently everybody just loves hockey. But healthcare, education, and pretty much everything else in the province of Alberta are collapsing. Well, the Premier of Alberta is living her best life in the middle of all of this. And no one in the UCP government seems to have any concern with what a dumpster fire this is or cares to hold the Premier to account, because somewhere in the midst of all this, they seem to have forgotten that they are supposed to work for Albertans first, not an ethically compromised leader, and certainly not themselves. But at least Marshall Smith retired. Could it possibly get worse? If you made it this far, you already know the answer. It should be pretty clear at this point that Sam Raich is winning big financially in all of this. He's had 2 massive deals that were paid for with taxpayers' money under 2 separate premiers, despite the first round of product he delivered reportedly causing harm to healthcare workers and being of varying quality, and the second major round turning into a boondoggle costing Albertans upwards of $100 million. But does it pay to be a part of Sam Raich's inner circle? Sure seems to have paid off well for Sam Jaber. He's on the board of Invest Alberta, and he's making enough bank that he can gift the Premier of Alberta an entire Skybox worth of tickets for a Stanley Cup semifinal playoff game. Is there anyone else? Well, it appears that if you're family of Sam Raich, that relationship certainly doesn't seem to hurt when it comes to getting government jobs. Khalil Raich, who's been identified as family in multiple reports, landed a sweet gig as a policy advisor to the UCP government before moving on. Ahmad Jabara and Mahmoud Jabara, pictured here standing beside their Uncle Sam, also have landed gigs with the UCP government as policy advisors, despite having no identifiable substantial background experience in the portfolios they're advising on. Largely because since this story started up, they both appear to have deleted their primary LinkedIn and most of their public-facing social media. But nonetheless, Mahmoud Jabara, whose LinkedIn described him as a bilingual petroleum engineer, is a policy advisor to Rebecca Schultz, Minister of Environment and Parks. Ahmad Jabara, who deleted one of those 2 LinkedIns we found, appears to have described himself as having demonstrated history of working in the logistics and supply chain industry. Skilled in banking, managerial finance, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and finance, Ahmad Jabara is a policy advisor to Energy Minister Brian Jean. One of these LinkedIns also has him as an employee of MHCare Medical from 2020 forward. Even if you're not family, though, having connections with Sam Raich seems to at least coincide with sweet appointments. Jayan Nagendran, another Edmonton-based physician, was appointed by Daniel Smith to the Edmonton Police Commission in July of 2023. In fairness, though, the company that both Jayan and Raich had together for 3 years was dissolved a few months prior. But it's a fascinating coincidence given the scope of what we've discussed so far. And if you're Danielle Smith, you're definitely winning. Recently, former Deputy Premier Thomas Lukaszuk released 2 letters from 2 private schools to their students and parents claiming that a mysterious benefactor had stepped forward to pay for memberships and tickets for anyone for those schools over the age of 14 to attend Danielle Smith's leadership review to secure her leadership. We have not independently authenticated the letters that were brought forth from the former Deputy Premier of Alberta. But it's worth taking a look at those schools, because Smith has used those school stages to make several unfulfilled promises to the Muslim community around making Muslim holidays observed stat holidays and introducing Sharia law to Alberta Treasury Branch to make halal mortgages available outside of the private sector where they're available.
One of the exciting initiatives currently underway is exploring the idea of a rent-to-own financing model for purchasing homes in your province. And this is an idea that was spearheaded by members of your community to make sure that these mortgages are compliant with the tenets of your faith. As of right now, our government is collaborating with the Alberta Council of Imams to make an alternative financing model available to families of Islamic faith looking to purchase a home. By expanding access to these kinds of financing options, we're seeking to provide a pathway to all Albertans while respecting their religious rights and beliefs. And I look forward to providing updates about this soon, very likely before the end of the year.
And yes, there are historic corrections between Sam Raish and at least one of the schools. According to this YouTube video, he loaned the Edmonton Islamic Academy his Bentley for a school spirit video a few years back, so it feels safe to speculate that he maybe has some ties there. That school relies heavily on provincial funding, and they're currently looking to build one of the largest private religious schools in Alberta. The letter that was released by Lukasik directly references Smith's new funding to build private schools because, of course, it does. But again, Smith's funding promises include the government retaining ownership of those buildings, which means if Smith greenlights Christian schools, suddenly the province is in the business of owning chapels. And if the province greenlights Muslim schools, the province is in the business of owning mosques. Something separation church and state? That has led some to further speculate that Mraish could potentially be positioning himself to be the determining factor as to whether or not Smith survives her leadership review. To be clear, this is something that Mr. Mraish vehemently denies. As we're reaching the end of the production of this episode, and after multiple attempts to get comment from Mr. Mraish, we were contacted by his legal team. They provided us with this statement. Mr. Mraish categorically denies any involvement, directly or indirectly, with the school's involvement with the upcoming AGM or any supposed participation in any upcoming UCP event. But either way, one thing should be abundantly clear. Mraish has built his business empire over multiple administrations. Smith can for sure make things easier for Mraish and his partners, but it also appears that Smith may need Mraish far, far more than he needs her. So let's recap. One last time. Sam Raish is a businessman who prior to COVID appears to have been predominantly in the business of training in human resources in the oil and gas sector. As the COVID pandemic shut down business across the world, Mr. Mraish appears to have developed significant interests in private healthcare supplies and potentially private healthcare delivery. In a stunning coincidence with his rise to prominence in conversations in Alberta politics, at least 3 people who have been reportedly identified as his relatives have gotten jobs in government as policy advisors. His accountant has been appointed to the board of Invest Alberta by Danielle Smith. Another former business partner was appointed to the Edmonton Police Commission, again by Smith, and he somehow has managed to work his way into business with the senior executive officer of the Métis Nation of Alberta, despite what some could interpret as glaring conflicts of interest. Oh, and it appears that he's at least tangentially related to the alleged busing in of hundreds of Muslim students to ensure that Danielle Smith survives her leadership review, which again, he vehemently denies any involvement in. It's also worth highlighting at this point that if the letters that the former Deputy Premier of Alberta released are accurate and the schools follow through with the plans that are described in those letters, it's because in no small part that those students were potentially coerced. Because there's waiting lists for those schools. And there's been concerns raised that there's very clearly a, if you don't play ball, you don't get to stay subcurrent. It's also worth noting that the far-right media organization True North claims to have a recording of Danielle Smith's former campaign manager, Matthew Altheim, confirming that he's helping to arrange to have at least 2,000 members of the Muslim community bussed in. That's, by the way, the same Matthew Altheim whose media production company scored almost 2 million contracts from Smith after being elected, and who has also been identified in managing her social media for her. But it is True North. So, you know. Which brings us back to the picture. Because that means, with the exception of the BC Premier and his family, almost everyone in this picture has ties to Sam Raish, his business empire, including the Premier of Alberta. We're still not done. Because there are a lot of unanswered questions that are involved in this story, and some of them very much seem to have some smoke, if not actual fire, because some of these unanswered questions are very much based in established facts. One of the questions that has been posed is that Jaber could have actually been pulling from Sam Raish's playbook with the gift of the Skybox tickets, and there's actually some confirmed evidence to support that. It's known that Sam Raish hosted multiple ministers in his own Skybox in Edmonton, and while the Premier's office has kept an incredibly tight lid on MLAs and staff and preventing them from speaking to media or even answering the most basic media inquiries, there are allegations that Sam Raich's Skybox was a revolving door of ministers, MLAs, and staffers during the regular season and the playoff season. And there is truth to this. Because as we said earlier, Nathan Neudorf has already admitted that Maurice offered him tickets multiple times and confirmed that he attended a game against the Canucks as a guest of Maurice. Nate Horner confirmed that he attended not one but 2 games as a guest of Maurice, although in either a stunning admission of incompetence of either himself and his staff or a straight-up lie, he claimed that he had no idea who Maurice was or what Maurice's history of hundreds of millions of dollars with business with the government was. You know, Nate Horner, the finance minister, not knowing who's gotten over $250 million taxpayer dollars in business. Some people have pointed out that at the same time that Khalil Maurice scored his government job, Marshall Smith was the chief of staff for that department. Others have pointed out that the Tylenol deal came while Marshall Smith was Daniel Smith's chief of staff. There's also multiple social media posts of MHCare sending a variety of supplies to Lebanon, including to aid organizations, and according to this translated Facebook post, the Lebanese army. There's a lot of really shocking things that should be pretty alarming to all Albertans. But as of yet, Daniel Smith has been incredibly successful in keeping an incredibly tight lid on all of this. As we said, multiple Real reporters have reached out multiple times asking for comment, and Smith, the vast majority of her ministers, MLAs, and staffers have remained absolutely tight-lipped and have refused to provide any kind of transparency. These questions could all easily be answered, but instead of answering these questions, instead of taking responsibility, it seems Smith's office has demonstrably chosen to just lie. We proved that with our FOIP on the hotels. Smith had her press secretary tell the world that everyone had paid for their own hotels, but our FOIP proved that at the time, that wasn't the case. Daniel Smith has lied to Albertans on many occasions. Most of the time, they're just shockingly stupid lies that are easily caught. Most of the time, they're lies designed to lead people to politically expedient places. But this is different. Daniel Smith has lied and refuses to be transparent to what degree, if any, Sam Raich or others pull strings inside of the government. And that should be the #1 conversation that all Albertans are having. We can't fix healthcare if we have a government that is being manipulated and maneuvered by private businessmen. We can't fix the economy when public dollars are being siphoned off to make the uber rich richer, if that's what's happening. We can't fix education when the promise of new private religious schools on the taxpayer's dime could be used to determine where money goes because it could save a premiership. It's worth remembering this isn't the first time that the procurement process appears to have gone sideways. In the early days of 2021, we did a different episode where we highlighted questionable procurement practices when it came to buying masks for school children. That episode was the result of another FOIP that we completed that demonstrated that mask procurement didn't go at all as one would expect. And to make a very long story short, somehow the company of a UCP donor and supporter of Adriana LaGrange ended up with a pretty juicy contract. The Ethics Commissioner determined that there are grounds for suspicion and that there is no doubt that the minister's office had some involvement with that process. And this highlights the greatest problem. It seems inescapable at this point that the UCP has allowed for an erosion of the guardrails that are supposed to ensure that business conducted with taxpayer dollars is done in a way that is in the best interest of taxpayers. These same guardrails are supposed to ensure that the people making these decisions, again, with taxpayer money, aren't being influenced by anything other than what is the best and most appropriate use of that money. Daniel Smith's sweeping changes to ethics laws and the rules around what elected officials can accept as gifts have only accelerated the erosion that the UCP started. As an additional footnote and as a fascinating twist, according to the Elections Alberta database, Sam Hassine Marash and folks who share the same name as his family members have donated almost $25,000 to the Alberta NDP between 2019 and 2020. We have not found any evidence to date that the NDP have made any business decisions based on those donations, but as always, our DMs are open. But what's next for Marash's circle of associates? In this exhausting crawl down a rabbit hole, we discovered that on September 9th, 2024, just a few weeks ago, the Jabara Brothers Incorporated at one of Marash's addresses and using the services of Sam Jaber's accounting firm again, a company called Harmony Path Homes, which their website describes as providing care for seniors and vulnerable Albertans, and also claims on that same website to already be presently providing 2 group home programs. Also interesting is that Harmony Path Homes cites another separate organization that works with disabled children. But when we reached out to that organization, they advised us they don't do any work with Harmony Path Homes. So that's weird, right? We watch with great interest to see if Harmony Path Homes wins any government contracts and if they are competitively bid or sole sourced. We can't help but note that no lobby filing for Harmony Path has yet been filed. We also can't help but notice as well that both an Ahmed Jabara and a Mahmoud Jabara are still listed on the Government of Alberta staff directory as policy advisors to 2 ministers. Weird, right? And that's where the stops for today. We've reached out to all of the major players in what we've shared tonight, and while we did not get any responses from any of them or any comment from any of them above and beyond the comment we received from Mr. Marash denying any involvement with the UCP leadership review, I did receive a cease and desist letter alleging that our pursuit of this story is in some way motivated by Islamophobia. It's been suggested that I shouldn't publicly respond to that allegation. To hell with that. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Here at The Breakdown, we are proud of our track record of condemning hatred in all of its forms, conflating the questioning of businesses that have been the beneficiary of well over $250 million in taxpayers' business should not in any way be construed with anything other than a commitment to ensuring transparency from government and providing well-informed commentary. This episode is not about race, and it's not about religion. In a Venn diagram of corruption, the circle that represents the concerning business practices or abuse of public trusts overlaps with all ethnicities and all faiths. We remain committed to providing well-researched and well-informed commentary because we have the highest respect for the work of actual journalism. And we have neither the resources nor the structure of a newsroom. We will continue to do our best to make it clear that we do not consider ourselves journalists. We will continue to endeavor to provide well-researched commentary. We will continue to strive to be as accurate as possible. And when we are shown that we've made mistakes, we will own them. We will do all of this so our commentary and content continues to reflect reality and facts as much as possible. Everything that we've presented tonight, we wholeheartedly believe to be true and in the public interest. And it might even sound journalisty. Again, sorry about that. With all of that said, and our own commitment to ensuring transparency, we will provide everything that we have presented here, all of the supporting documentation, to any real journalist who wants access to it. And I want to take a moment to thank everyone on the team for making this episode possible. There have been literally hundreds of hours of research, fact-checking, and more that have been done by a team of volunteers whose greatest commonality is that we all believe in accountability. I also want to thank all of our patrons and financial supporters. There have been hundreds of dollars spent on pulling corporate records and filing FOIP requests that couldn't have been completed without everyday Albertans making sure that we have the resources that we need to do what we do. So here comes the plug. If you value the kind of content and commentary that we try to produce here, you can sign up to be one of our regular Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdowneb. If a regular commitment isn't your thing, you can also e-transfer us at info@thebreakdowneb.ca. And finally, if you want to get your hands on some of our super dope swag, you can get that at abpoly.ca. Thank you all for listening or tuning in. And as always, keep the conversation going.
Calamity.
Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. I'm your host, Nate Pike, and on this episode, we are here to talk about one thing only. The saga around the $80 million of taxpayers' money spent on children's medication continues to evolve, and a statement of claim from the former AHS CEO sees the procurement of the medication playing a central role in alleged concerns around the procurement process that saw Albertans only receive a fraction of the medication that they paid for, with almost $50 million apparently still in limbo. And while that situation has exploded into what the NDP have named the corrupt care scandal, there's some basic foundational questions that we've continued to pursue answers on, despite being the target of a $6 million lawsuit from Sam Raish and his company MHCare Medical. That lawsuit remains ongoing. Tonight, though, we wanted to talk about another piece of the puzzle that has fallen into place via a FOIP request that we recently received the results of. But in order to explain the context of that FOIP, let's go back to the fall of 2022 when the procurement of the children's medication hit the news. On December 1st, 2022, then Health Minister Jason Copping issued this directive. Pursuant to Sections 8 and 16B of the Regional Health Authorities Act, I, Jason Copping, Minister of Health, direct as follows. Alberta Health Services, AHS, shall take all necessary steps to procure on an expedited basis the following pharmaceuticals impacted by national shortages: acetaminophen oral liquid 80 milligrams per milliliter or 32 milligrams per milliliter, ibuprofen oral liquid 40 milligrams per milliliter. AHS will ensure the procurement complies with the applicable Health Canada requirements. Alberta Health will ensure the funding for all costs related to the procurement, including shipping and distribution costs, will be provided to AHS. AHS and its agents will be authorized to distribute and sell the product to pharmacies and other provinces with the intent to recover as much of the costs as possible. This is the directive that ordered the purchase of the children's medication by AHS. And while there's definitely a conversation to be had about this being a perfect example of why there has historically been a firewall between elected officials and the implementation of healthcare, that's a conversation for another day. Today, we're here to talk about a few specific things. And we want to start with the fact that then Health Minister Jason Copping went out of his way to specify what concentrations of the medication to order. He's very clear. Acetaminophen, the generic chemical name for the active compound in Tylenol, 80 milligrams per milliliter or 32 milligrams per milliliter, and ibuprofen at 40 milligrams per milliliter. 80 milligrams per milliliter is the concentration typically used for infants under the age of 2 years old. It's a stronger concentration because babies don't generally like to take in a lot of anything when they're sick. 32 milligrams per milliliter is the dose for kids above 2 years because they can generally follow instructions a bit better than a baby. And when you have kids whose hands can do hand things, having a lower concentration around is generally a good thing. Because if kids get into acetaminophen for just, the fun grape flavor, it can be really damaging to their livers. For the ibuprofen, the concentration that was mandated by the directive, 40 milligrams per milliliter, is generally the dose used for kids from 4 months to 2 years. The higher concentration being, again, because infants generally tolerate smaller volumes of liquid better. So, to be clear, the ministerial order issued was directing AHS to purchase acetaminophen in the exact same concentrations that are currently used in North America, commonly under the Tylenol brand name. There's many other providers of acetaminophen, but let's be clear. None of the other providers or brands other than Tylenol are Tylenol. They're just not. They're Tylenol, but not. Tylenol not. Where things got really confusing, though, is when it comes to what AHS actually ordered. Because according to this purchase order, issued on December 9th, 8 days after the initial ministerial directive was issued, what was actually ordered was acetaminophen with a concentration of 24 milligrams per milliliter and ibuprofen with a concentration of 20 milligrams per milliliter. Now, to be very clear, both of these concentrations are lower concentrations than were actually ordered by the health minister to be procured. These lower concentrations also arguably make the medication slightly safer to the risk of overdose and organ damage, but the lower doses also make it easier for parents and caregivers to give not enough of the medication for it to do what it needs to do if they're used to using the normal concentrations found in North America, which made us wonder why. When the ministerial directive was issued that clearly spelled out the exact concentrations to be ordered, why would AHS then go ahead and spend $70 million of taxpayers' money on not those exact concentrations? So as we do on this show, we filed a FOIP. And in that FOIP, we explicitly asked, seeking all records as defined by Section 1Q of the Act related to any communications authorizing or related to the change of concentrations of the Atabay children's medication ordered on December 9th, 2022 from the original concentration mandated in the ministerial directive of December 1st, 2022 of acetaminophen 80 milligrams per milliliter or 32 milligrams per milliliter to the ordered concentration of 24 milligrams per milliliter. Please include any relevant correspondence directing this change or any approvals of the change, which is a pretty complete and specific request. On May 9th, we received the results. We did not receive any correspondence suggesting that any records had been withheld. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. On December 1st, 2022, a Thursday, an email was sent out that appears to reference a draft version of the ministerial directive. There was a flurry of discussion as to various timelines. Subject, forward, pediatric analgesic announcement. FYI, I just received this draft NR from the DMO. They are also under the impression this would be Monday at the earliest. Please don't share further. On December 5th, the Monday after the weekend, Isaac Van Dyne, who was then the director for the Office of the President and CEO, asked for an update. Subject, regarding pediatric analgesic announcement. Importance high. Hi, JP. The minister's office is just asking for an update on the pediatric acetaminophen procurement. Are you able to get us something as soon as possible this morning? And this is where we start to get some answers and some more questions, because shortly after, a reply was sent by Jitendra Prasad. Hi, Isaac. Update as of this morning is as follows. The manufacturer has applied to Health Canada for approval over the weekend for 2 strengths of acetaminophen and 1 strength of ibuprofen suspension. Health Canada has confirmed that they have received the applications that are in the process of reviewing. They have not provided any preliminary feedback at this time. The application number is noted below. The 2 strengths of acetaminophen that they have applied for our approval are 24 milligrams per milliliter and 32 milligrams per milliliter. The reason for the 2 strengths is that the 24 milligrams per milliliter strength is what is predominantly sold in the international markets, and the export manufacturer has export authorization from the Turkish regulators, so it can be received in Canada faster. This strength is the same as what Health Canada has imported from Australia. They will switch to the 32 milligrams per milliliter once approval is received. If approvals are received in a timely manner, the first flight can land in Alberta December 15th or 16th. The product will have bilingual labeling. Purchase orders will be provided once we hear back from Health Canada on their preliminary assessments. Product will have an expiry of more than 24 months. Thanks, Isaac. So just 4 days after the ministerial order was issued, and over a weekend no less, an individual named Jitendra Prasad appears to be a person managing the procurement of the children's medications. And it clearly shows the procurement will not adhere to the concentrations set out in the ministerial directive, and that a decision was made to go with the lower concentrations as it was already available. The reply references the fact that Health Canada had procured the same concentration from Australia. What appears to be left out from this email, though, is the fact that the Australian product imported to Canada was only for use in hospitals under strict safety precautions, and it was never available for public sale. In this response, Mr. Prasad indicates there would be a switch to the standard North American concentration at some point in the future, but that part of the plan certainly never carried over to the purchase order that was issued to MHCare. So even though there was no identified shortage in the hospital supply chain, the first part of the order was a supply that could only be used in hospitals. And the supply that was ultimately ordered on the PO in no way reflected that pivot in concentrations in any way. And in the original PO, the delivery date was specified as being December 14th, 2022. But adding even more confusion is this exchange on January 10th, 2023, which came at a press conference more than a month after the initial announcement.
We have a statement from Health Canada that says they received proposals by Alberta for the importation of children's ibuprofen and acetaminophen for use in pharmacies, and that a decision was provided to you guys in December. What exactly did that decision say?
There's a couple of things that we had to do in working through with a new supplier. The Health Canada has to go through and examine the manufacturer. They have to examine our import facilities. We had to make sure that the formulation was the same as we would sell for generic products here. We had to get French and English packaging approved. And we went through all of those different steps. And so as a result, we have our first shipment arriving on the weekend. It's going to be for Alberta Health Services use. It's 250,000 bottles. The remaining 4.750 bottles is 4.750 million bottles are going to be subject to an additional delay, because for retail use, you have to have a child-proof cap. As I understand it, we are working on making sure that that approval process is taking place, and so that'll be the second batch. And as soon as we know when the retail use is going to be available, we'll do another press release. But the good news is that our Alberta Health Services hospitals will have the first shipment by this weekend.
Well, I'm talking specifically about pharmacies. So those are supposed to be on the shelves by Christmas is what you guys said. They aren't on the shelves. So I'm just wondering, so how I understand it is that it was actually rejected, that proposal in December, and then you had to put forward a new proposal. Is that correct?
No, it was just a process we went through. I mean, we respect Health Canada has a role in making sure that we have the safest product possible on the shelf. And the issue that they had was that when you make a product available for a retail use, it has to have a child-proof cap. So we're just working with the manufacturer to make sure that that is in place so that we can make it available for retail use. And look, I don't want to rush Health Canada. Certainly want to make sure that people, as soon as the supply arrives, that they feel confident in it. It really was just a matter of us meeting the regulatory conditions, and that was the last condition we needed to meet.
So you had to put forward a new application.
We've been working with them right from the beginning. We always knew that we would have a certain amount that would arrive that would be for AHS use, and then we had to continue working with them to make sure that we had the bottling that met their specifications. One of the specifications was we had to make sure that it was listed in the same familiar type of formulation that we have in Canada. We had to make sure French and English labeling, and this last hurdle is we just have to make sure we've got the child-proof cap. So it's been a process that we've been going on. It's just taken a little bit longer than we expected, but the first shipment is arriving this weekend for Alberta Health Services.
Just to confirm, this is the same application that came back in December.
I've been working with this on this all the way along. We have been working with Alberta Health Health Canada to make sure that we were meeting all of their compliance. It's a brand new supplier. There's just a couple of hurdles that we needed to get through, and we're almost on the last one.
So, according to the Premier herself, Health Canada approval had not yet been granted. The safety requirements for the bottles had not yet been met, but nonetheless, the purchase order had been issued on December 8th, 2022. It wasn't until January 18th, 2023, more than a month after the December 14th delivery date stipulated in the PO had passed, that the first shipment arrived and was directed to hospitals because that product did not meet the safety standards for retail sales. From the Alberta government's own press release. In order to receive Health Canada approval, the manufacturer was required to submit a proposal outlining information on the medicine's quality, safety, and product packaging. Health Canada reviewed the proposal and requested additional information as well as a number of changes to meet Canada's regulatory requirements. One of these changes was the need to add child-resistant caps to the bottles for retail use supply. In the interim, an initial shipment was approved for hospital use only, as child-resistant caps are not a regulatory requirement when medicine is administered by medical professionals in a hospital. As a result, rather than wait for the total shipment, Alberta's government opted to receive a first shipment with medicines for hospital use. And we know from our previous FOIP that the first payments had been made on December 9th, 2022. Clearly, before the medication was even approved for either hospital use or for retail sales. In fact, the exact dates for the approvals as per the Health Canada website are December 30th, 2022, January 26th, 2023, and February 10th, 2023. So there are a lot of unanswered questions still, perhaps even more than we started with. But it seems we have some indication towards an answer to one of our biggest questions, and that is, who managed the procurement of the meds and who seems to have overridden the minister's directions? And based off of these FOIP results, we can say that Jitendra Prasad appears to have been the lead in the procurement process. Some of you might find that name familiar. Let's quickly reference another pertinent document, and that's the statement of claim by former Alberta Health Services CEO Athana Mentzelopolous, whose allegations remain to be tested in a court of law. Because in paragraph 20, section A, she alleges that Prasad retired briefly from AHS in April 2022 before becoming a contractor for AHS, and then returned as an AHS employee in the position of Chief Program Officer and later Special Advisor for AHS Contracts, Procurement, and Supply Management from October of 2022 to December of 2023, before then being seconded from AHS to Alberta Health. And in section B, she alleges Prasad had an MHCare medical email address, jprasad@mhcaremedical.com, in November 2022, just before the then Minister of Health directed AHS to enter in a contract with MHCare for a $70 million children's acetaminophen purchase order and supply agreement. Further, in paragraph 41 of the CEO's statement of claim, she states, in October 2024, AHS also received a media inquiry regarding the AHS purchase of children's ibuprofen and acetaminophen that included questions about any business AHS had with MHCare Medical and any other companies owned by Sam Raish. The media inquiry was sent to Prasad to draft a reply because Mentzelopolous had been told by Alberta Health that Prasad was the person who negotiated the AHS purchase contract for children's acetaminophen and knew everything about the deal. So to be clear, the lawsuit launched back in February of 2025 by the former AHS CEO alleged that Jitendra Prasad was not only the individual that negotiated the deal, but also alleges that he had an email address with the company that was tasked to bring in the medication over a 4-day period, including a weekend. Additionally, in a February 20th, 2025 article in the Globe and Mail, emails obtained by the Globe show that on January 11th, 2023, Mr. Prasad forwarded an email from an MHCare account in his name to what appears to be his personal Gmail account, then to his AHS account. He then forwarded that email, which included the resume of another person with an MHCare email, to an AHS employee who worked in procurement. The original forwarded email was dated November 7th, 2022. This report by the Globe seems to strongly suggest that Jitendra Prasad indeed had access to, if not control of, an MHCare email account between November 7th, 2022 and January 11th, 2023, when the medication order was negotiated and placed. The allegations in the former CEO's statement of claim, as of yet untested in a court of law, and the results of this FOIP read together seem to clearly show that Jitendra Prasad was indeed the point man on the deal while having some sort of a relationship with MHCare that necessitated him having a corporate email with them. Now, we did reach out to MHCare and ask them for comment. They declined. We also attempted to email the J. Prasad at MHCare Medical email address for comment, and while we didn't receive a reply, we also didn't get any notifications that you would expect to get if you sent an email to an inactive or incorrect address. Do with that what you will. And this brings us to the point. There are problems here. That is undeniable. The need for an independent judicial inquiry enacted under the Inquiries Act should be a foregone conclusion at this point. But for reasons defying reason, the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, continues to refuse to put that inquiry into motion. And this is why the AHS CEO's lawsuit should be so important to Albertans. Because now, with this FOIP, we can say at least one of the things that she alleges in her lawsuit appears to be true. Specifically, that Mr. Prasad was involved with negotiating the purchase contract for the children's acetaminophen. And if this piece is true, Albertans deserve to definitively know if Jitendra Prasad did or still does have an email address with MHCare, and they deserve to definitively know whether or not any of the other allegations in the former CEO's lawsuit are true. And there are a lot of allegations in that lawsuit that suggest corruption at the highest levels of government in Alberta. Albertans deserve to know why the Premier, Danielle Smith, whose own office, cabinet, and her own damn self are directly tied to the principals in the allegations, why she refuses to provide Albertans the transparency they deserve, and that only a truly independent inquiry under the Public Inquiries Act can deliver. But again, instead of holding a public inquiry that could compel testimony and force the truth into the light, Danielle Smith, her ministers, and her MLAs refused to make that happen. Instead, the government seems hell-bent on utilizing massive legal resources paid for by the taxpayers of Alberta to exhaust the resources of that former AHS CEO to prevent her lawsuit from ever seeing the inside of a courtroom. And in the absence of a public inquiry, that lawsuit remains the best option to ensure that Albertans get the truth. Here at The Breakdown, we're going to continue to pursue this story and the truth despite the ongoing $6 million lawsuit against us by MHCare and Sam Raish. If you want to help us in that fight, you can do that at www.savethebreakdownab.ca. If you want to help the former AHS CEO Athana Mentzelopolous continue her lawsuit against the government of Alberta, which is again currently the best hope at the full truth ever seeing the light of day, you can do that at the GoFundMe set up by folks from Danielle Smith's own constituency at saveathana.com. To be extra clear, those two campaigns are completely unrelated. We'll be back next week with another one of our regular roundups. But in the meantime, as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.